Okay. Hi, good morning. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. It is 9:01 a.m. on Thursday, June 26, 2025. We're here at the California Natural Resources Building in Sacramento, California. My name is Julie Lee, and I am chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. Emma's going to now explain how the public can participate in this meeting. Emma?
If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you.
Thanks, Emma. In accordance with our litigation requirements, we're now going to conduct a roll call of council members to establish a quorum. Emma, can you lead us in the roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. I want to note that Councilmember Hueso and Councilmember Burgess are absent and will make an announcement when they join the meeting. Okay. Councilmember Damrell. Councilmember Maranian.
Here.
Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here.
Just noting that Councilmember Miller is also absent.
Okay, thank you. And Councilmember Burgess just walked in. Perfect timing for the roll call. So we have a quorum and we can move forward. Our agenda item number 3 is closed session. So we will be meeting in closed session to discuss pending litigation with legal counsel pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E1. The council will be discussing the following matters: County of Sacramento versus Delta Stewardship Council, Sacramento Superior Court No. 25 WM00030, and Tulare Lake Basin Water Storage District versus California Department of Water Resources, Court of Appeal of the State of California, 3rd Appellate District Case number C101878. So we'll close now for closed session, and we will be back by 9:30 a.m. Thank you. All right, good morning. We're going to go ahead and reconvene. It's 9:45, and we have nothing to report out from closed session. So we'll move on to item number 4, public comment. This is an item for the public to comment on any topic that is not on our agenda. Any comments on items on the agenda will be taken during those items. Emma, do we have any public comments at this time?
No, Madam Chair, we do not. Councilmember Zingali.
Oh, he might not be back yet.
All right, yeah, no public comment.
Okay. And then I'll note for the record that Member Hueso joined us in closed session. So we have all of our council members here except Vice Chair Miller is absent for this entire meeting. Our next item is the consent calendar. We have 2 items on the consent calendar. The first is the adoption of the May 22nd, 2025 meeting summary. And the second is an amendment to contract number 19124 with the Regents of the University of California, San Diego, California Sea Grant for the position of Social Scientist Extension Specialist. So before we vote on this one, I'll ask if there's any public comments on items on the consent calendar.
There are no public comments in Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali.
No public comments in Humboldt.
Thank you. So I'll now entertain a motion to approve these 2 items.
Second.
All right, moved by Member Hueso, seconded by Member Maranian. Emma, can we proceed with a roll call vote?
Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Burgess, aye. Councilmember Damrell. Damrell, aye. Councilmember Hueso. Hueso, aye. Councilmember Maranian.
Aye.
Maranian, aye. Councilmember Zingali.
Yes.
Zingali, aye. Chair Lee.
Aye.
Lee, aye. The motion passes.
Thank you. Now on agenda item number 6, which is the consideration and potential adoption of the Delta Adaptation Plan. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Pearson for the introductions.
Thank you. Good morning. Yes, on the agenda today, we're jumping right into our flagship action item here, and as staff are already at the table, and I'm going to let Jeff introduce them in just a moment. So I want to recognize and reflect on the journey that we've been on for the past 7 years to get to this point, to have a climate adaptation strategy for the Delta to present for your consideration. we first took steps to inventory assets and on Delta Islands and use best available science to assess climate-related risks and threats in the Delta almost 5 years ago at this point. That was part one of our Delta Adapts effort. We looked at life, property, ecosystems, water supply, and more. And then we shifted to deep outreach in order to brainstorm and refine strategies that would adapt us to those changes looking forward to those threats in the Delta. So we really embarked upon this effort because there was no comprehensive climate strategy for the Delta, which is kind of amazing here in 2025 that there is not yet a comprehensive climate strategy. And as a reminder, the Bay Area and the Bay Area, our counterparts at BCDC, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, who we have taken inspiration from in developing this strategy, they first adopted a regional climate strategy in 2011. And they have amended it since then, but it just goes to show how overdue we are in the Delta for this type of document. So if the council takes affirmative action today to adopt this strategy for the Delta, it will be a first for California. And given what's happening with federal policy shifts on climate and science, in my view, our work has only grown in urgency and importance. So I am grateful for the support and engagement of our agency and community partners, without whom we could not be where we are today. And certainly implementation of the recommendations in this strategy will not be successful without the continued engagement of those partners. So I'm going to now hand it over to our Deputy Executive Officer for Planning and Performance, Jeff Henderson.
Good morning, council members. It's great to be here today for this important occasion. We're really excited to be here. Delta Adapts, as Jessica mentioned, is the climate adaptation initiative that we began back in 2018 with an aim to better understand specific risks faced by the Delta and propose strategies to prepare accordingly. Joining me today are Morgan Chow, who has been managing this effort for us for about the last 2 years, and Annika Ragsdale, who's joined the council about a year ago and has been instrumental to completion of the work. And this is the first, as Jessica mentioned, climate adaptation plan for the region. And what we did is we presented a public review draft that went out for 90-day public comment and tribal consultation beginning on November 18th. We then came to the council at your prior November meeting with a more in-depth discussion of some of the content of the plan according to regions within the Delta. So the plan was broken down by region. And we've been before you at prior meetings with detailed summaries of the strategies according to 4 focus areas. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to walk you through at a very high level the comments we received during the public review and tribal consultation periods and the edits we made in response to those comments. And then at the end, I'll present our staff recommendation to adopt the final adaptation plan. Before we dive in, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge members of the project team that have dedicated much of their time to this product. These include Ashok Batula, James Edwards, Dan Constable, Chris Kwan, Annie Merritt, Annika Ragsdale, Aaron Mullen, Stephen Elser, Dylan Chappell, Audrey Cho, and Iris Suarez. Many other past and current staff have also contributed to the development of this plan, and I'd like to specifically recognize Dr. Jessica Rudnick for co-leading the development of the agricultural strategies and helping write much of the governance chapter, as well as to recognize Harriet Ross, who led this project during her time at the council. Next slide, please. Actually, second slide, please. And advance one. So a short recap of how we got here. Jessica mentioned the 2021 vulnerability assessment that we conducted, which focused on the vulnerability of the various different assets in the Delta to flooding, extreme heat, drought, and wildfire. So in that vulnerability assessment, we found that flood risk is one of the most pressing threats to the Delta, It's going to continue to worsen in the future with changes in sea levels, precipitation, hydrology, and temperatures. These impacts will not affect all Delta residents equally. Delta water exports will also be less reliable in the future due to climate change. The existing water supply system simply doesn't provide enough storage to capture anticipated increases in runoff under more variable precipitation. In terms of water quality, in-Delta water uses may be threatened by episodic water quality declines, with future droughts potentially exposing more acres of Delta agriculture to more saline water than has historically occurred. Delta agricultural production trends will continue to shift due to climate change, and the number of extreme heat days will increase Delta-wide. So what we set out to do was to develop a strategy to respond to these vulnerabilities, and that led us to the creation of the adaptation plan that Morgan will tell you a little bit more about, beginning with the next slide.
Thanks, Jeff, and good morning, Chair Lee and council members. It's great to be before you today. I'm Morgan Chow. As Jeff mentioned, I'm the program manager for our Climate Change and Environmental Justice Unit, and I'll walk you through our process briefly and then the revisions we made to our public draft. So you've seen this graphic before. It shows our process for collecting input and developing the plans, strategies, and actions to improve our region's resilience to climate impacts. You've heard a lot about our engagement in past presentations, so I'll just reiterate that this initiative has really been the vehicle for some of our most far-reaching engagement we've done as council staff to date, and has really been the foundation for a lot of new and revived partnerships and relationships. It's been so expansive that our initiative has really been termed a climate collaborative by researchers at UC Davis, connecting hundreds of practitioners. And while we led the development of the plan, the work, as Jessica mentioned, really depends on partnerships and leaders that are beyond the council. So hence really the need for diverse input throughout the development and recognition of progress that's already been made alongside the innovation that has to happen in the future. Next slide. So Jeff touched on this, but for the adaptation plan, we're working in 4 focus areas. Those are agriculture, flood risk reduction, ecosystem, and water supply reliability. And we've worked to integrate equity throughout all of the strategies. So the bulk of the plan really consists of these high-level strategies with implementing actions, both physical and management level, according to these 4 focus areas. And as we touched on at the November meeting, will be realized differently depending on your location within the Delta. And each strategy has a recommended implementation lead and several partners. Next slide. So now I'll just give a quick summary of the comments received. We consulted with 3 tribes and we received 32 public comments. This includes comments that were raised during more than 20 presentations and or tabling at community events, comments from council members and public at 2 council meetings, both March 2024 and November 2024, and a drop-in workshop that we held in January for additional questions and feedback. So some key comments included interest in continued collaboration with council as we transition to implementation, and really specific requests for coordination of specific actions, timelines, and responsibilities. We heard the importance of Delta levies and the need for consistent funding for levee maintenance and improvements in addition to multi-benefit projects. A request for prioritization of actions, noting the benefits of sequencing many of the actions in our plan over time and focusing efforts where there's both accepted science and a deeper understanding of approaches that can mitigate these impacts. We heard suggestions for implementation, a lot of really good ones, including the need for things like a Delta-specific levy standard, improving levy operations and maintenance transparency, working to improve communication around financing for flood recovery, developing a funding strategy for adaptation and a new governance framework, and also just working more to address dynamic climate conditions. Lastly, the Delta Independent Science Board provided comments requesting clarification on the relationship of the vulnerability assessment to the adaptation plan, as well as more detail on the process for developing the plan, strategies, and actions, and providing other helpful section by section edits. Yeah.
For folks that, may kind of ebb and flow as far as the interest in all of these things, like CCVA, I was sitting here trying to remember, what is CCVA? What is CCVA? So it'd be really good for folks, either we provide some sort of acronym table for folks when they're dealing with what we're dealing with, or to actually spell it out, because I was trying to remember what that was and not being able to. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, we'll spell it out. Thanks for that comment. And that is our climate change vulnerability assessment, the part 1 of this project. Okay, so the next slide, please. So now to just a quick summary of the edits that were made. In response to the comments received, we made many changes. Attachment 2 to your staff report for this agenda item provides the section by section description of changes made. And then rather than going through that entire document, I'll just provide some key points from the edits. So throughout the document, we refer to climate change impacts that are happening as in the present, as well as those projected in the future. We added additional detail to other state plans and initiative and how our plan supports or aligns with those. We made additional connections to the vulnerability assessment and how those findings relate to our proposed strategies. We clarified how our outreach that I shared on the previous slide informed the strategies and actions in the plan. We added emphasis to the need for sustained support for levees. We clarified that not all restoration projects sequester carbon, and also adjusted language around carbon sequestration and subsidence reversal and flood risk. We added minor details about ideas for next steps following the adoption of the plan. And we identified 30 adaptation accelerator actions, which I'll briefly cover on the next slide. So this was in response to comments requesting prioritization of the actions in the plan. So we have 30, what we're calling adaptation accelerator actions that should be addressed first in the implementation of the plan. And this slide shows 3 example actions according to each of our focus areas. There's obviously more in the document. And these actions all have 2 main things in common. The first is that they should happen now, sooner rather than later, because there is like a narrower window for implementation for these. So if it's not started soon, that you might miss that window of opportunity, either because it's no longer possible or the intended benefits just can't be realized as much. And the second is that they already have widespread support in the adaptation community. They're either included in other agency plans or existing initiatives and are based on established documented science. And that's all from me. I'll pass it to my colleague, Annika.
Hi, good morning, Chair Lee and council members. I'm excited to be here today to talk about next steps now that we have this plan. So if you can go to the next slide, I will tell you what's coming next in implementation. So first, I wanted to share how we'll use the final plan to frame our adaptation priorities at the council. So throughout the rest of this year, we're focusing on the following 4 tasks to advance the strategies and actions in the adaptation plan, which are connecting with adaptation plan proposed leads and partner agencies through the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, or DPIC, to coordinate around strategy and action leadership and implementation. We're also working on a Delta Plan gap analysis, which is basically reviewing the adaptation plan alongside the Delta Plan to identify gaps and opportunities to update the Delta Plan to include considerations of climate change in its content, policies, and recommendations. And we're kicking off the 3rd iteration of our Science for Communities program to connect tribes, communities, and local public agencies with subject matter experts to address the research needs and desires of communities in the Delta. And in the past, we've had a few projects that have really had a climate change or climate justice focus. So we're excited to see what proposed projects we'll get this time around. And lastly, we're reimagining how we quantify and visualize social vulnerability as it relates to climate change through our existing tools, like our Social Vulnerability Index we created for the vulnerability assessment. And we're also looking at other tools that are being created by the state. So if you go to the next slide, I'd like to share one other highlight, which is we're working on a Delta Adapts Adaptation Strategy dashboard, which will allow council staff, partners, and the public to view the adaptation strategies and implementing actions of the plan in a much more user-friendly format than having to flip through the multi-hundred-page report. I think in the plan, we've got 20 different strategies and like 130 actions. So we realized we needed something that was just much easier to organize those and be able to sort through them. So strategies will be organized by proposed strategy leads and partners. So our partner agencies can just search by their name and see what they're associated with. And you can also sort by focus area, hazards addressed, and co-benefits. And I'm happy to share that this will be available later this summer on our Delta Adapts webpage. So with that, that's a quick summary of what's coming next, and I'll hand it over to Jeff with the recommendation.
Next slide, please. All right, so on behalf of the many staff who've contributed to this work over the past 7 years, it's my privilege to recommend that the council approve Resolution 2025-08, which would adopt the final adaptation plan, Delta Adapts, Creating a Climate Resilient Future. That concludes our presentation. We're happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Do any members have any questions for the panel?
Councilmember Zingali online.
Hi, Daniel. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. First, it's really been a privilege to have a front row seat to this work ongoing and to see the product. I just especially have to say attachment 2 is so terrific to be able to really see the evidence of the genuine listening and incorporation of concrete things. There's one, I'll just, for example, that particularly caught my attention is including the impact of farm workers and the perspective of farm workers that you mentioned from a Yolo County outreach. Can you give us any more texture just for what that is referring to, the impact on farm workers and the perspective that was added?
Thanks for the comment and question. So in a lot of our outreach for both this work and for our tribal and environmental justice work was with new organizations that I don't think we had engaged with in the past, and connecting with a community organization that represented farm workers was one of the areas that was challenging for us. But we do participate in the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative that includes sort of like the northern end of the Delta and then goes up north into the foothills. And Yolo County participates in that, and they basically were able to share like the interview findings that they heard from working with the CBO who works with farm workers in Yolo County. So that was sort of like our best connection there, and we put that in there because we have just heard a lot of from folks that we've engaged with that they want to hear about the farm worker experience, and we have a whole section on agriculture, and it is very important to the Delta. So that's where that came from, if that was the question.
Thank you for including that.
Oh, great. I know that, as Jessica mentioned, this has been a multi-year effort. I know when I first got appointed to the council, I had questions about this, I think in my confirmation hearing, and it seemed like there were so many plans in the works. It was almost a little confusing for me to sort of absorb everything that was in motion. And I'm just thrilled that, now that we've passed the tribal justice and environmental justice issue paper, and this adaptation, the adoption of this with the lens of the tribal issue and tribal environmental issues, I think kind of shows how we're using both the work that we've done on the tribal and environmental issues in our current work and getting these things over the finish line. just happens to be while I'm the chair, because I know it's been, like I said, a multi-year effort. So I just want to thank everybody for all the work put into it, and the many, many public comments and input that we've received from all of our stakeholders has just been fantastic. So I think before I ask for a motion, I'll ask if there's any public comments on this item. Yes.
Oh, yes. Please come up to the podium.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Kathleen Schaefer. In these changing times, I think it is important for the public to take a moment to thank the dedicated staff of our organizations and governments. And I want to thank the staff for all their hard work. This document clearly reflects the extensive outreach, the thoughtful engagement, and the best science that California governments has to offer. I want to particularly thank the staff for including the case study of the Delta Region GAD. It was 53 years ago, almost 2 weeks ago, that the Brannon-Andrus Island levee failed, inundating the entire town of Isleton. And I'm pleased to announce that we are, thanks to funding from the Department of Water Resources and support from the Department of Insurance, we are days away from signing a parametric insurance policy that will provide $2.5 million to the households in Isleton should the event happen again. And I just want to note that as we work through these issues and continue to refine and improve our levees, floods will become a less frequent event, and they will transition from low probability to high consequence events. Nobel Prize winning Daniel Kahneman talked about the fact that when you have a low probability, high consequence event, you need to engage slow thinking as opposed to fast thinking, which is the normal purview of city governments and city councils. So it is going to be important, I think, as we move forward and as we think about these changes, to continue to support efforts like the Delta Region Geologic Hazard Abatement District, because it provides a safe space to have these very difficult and thoughtful conversations about events that may occur but may not occur this year or next year, that may occur 53 years from now, but are have the very real possibility of occurring. So again, I want to thank the staff for all their hard work, and as a member of the public, express my appreciation for their diligence. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Emma, are there any other public comments?
Thank you. Yes, we have a public comment from Jay Ziegler. Can you unmute him? And you should be able to speak now.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to sign in today. Let me also just add appreciation to the Delta Stewardship staff and the council's continued engagement in the Delta Adapt strategy. I think it's imperative to recognize that the Delta is one of the most climate threatened places in the country. But at the same time, we should acknowledge that it was really designed that way since the inception of the Swamp Act and the reclamation of some 55 islands across the Delta. And so I think imperative in this, and that the strategy has done a good job of recognizing this, is that the Delta is not a one uniform environment. It is a series of complex communities, interaction from time immemorial of a cross-section of tribes throughout the Delta region and above and below, and a complex environment of mosaic of wetlands, upland habitat types, communities, and historic communities throughout the Delta. And I think the strategy has done just a really good job of listening to those perspectives, incorporating best science, diverse inputs, and recognizing the complexity of responding to climate challenges. I think the framework of addressing flood risk reduction, agricultural viability throughout the Delta, water supply reliability, and ecosystem restoration is a really smart way of thinking about a more climate resilient Delta. I do want to just kind of jump to, I think, some of the important areas that we all need to look toward in implementation. I think the recent changes of recognizing accelerator actions that we can monitor by 2030 in terms of actually addressing climate risk threats is really imperative. One element of the plan that I want to pull out is that is the focus on Delta flood protection in terms of identifying more reliable, ongoing, predictable funding streams from local, state, and federal participants. And I think that's candidly imperative to reducing flood risk threats and having a greater sense of where the real flood threats are across the Delta and where the opportunities are for multi-benefit projects, and how we better protect communities. I'm very excited at the project that Kathleen's highlighted in the Ileton parametric insurance strategy. I think we need to look at those kinds of localized, community-built, very focused strategies that define particular objectives and implementation actions in really providing assurances to diverse communities across the Delta that the complexity of interacting climate issues, along with ambitious restoration targets and protecting the ongoing viability of agriculture throughout the Delta, can really work together, but it will take a concerted effort over time. So again, I would just like to acknowledge the incredible work that Jeff, Morgan, Annika, Audrey, Jess, Harriet, many others have undertaken. We appreciate the active outreach that many of them have engaged in directly with the Office of the Delta Water Master and others at the State Board in developing the Delta Adapt strategy, and would strongly encourage your adoption of this program. And again, just the continued follow-up with communities across the Delta to ensure that implementation actions, necessary funding actions, integration of local, tribal, state, and federal parties are really happening in a way that Delta communities can participate in and benefit from. So thank you all for the opportunity to comment today. And thank you for the hard work and bringing this together. Again, like this is really a 5-6 year effort that we are really seeing come to fruition. So thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
We have an additional public comment online from Mike Avina. You should be able to unmute now.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike Avina here with Tulare Reserve, speaking on behalf of local agencies of the North Delta. To echo other comments, I want to commend the council and staff on the magnitude of this document and all the work that went into it. That said, I do want to reiterate our comments provided by letters saying that we oppose isolated conveyance as an adaptation strategy, and we maintain that it's inconsistent with the mandate of the Delta Reform Act to reduce reliance on Delta water supplies and to protect the Delta's place. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no further requests for public comment.
Yes, Ben, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Madam Chair, and I'd like to make a motion, but I'd like to add some comments if that's okay.
Sure.
And simply also to echo a thanks to staff, to everybody involved in creating this. I've been now involved with the Delta Stewardship Council for 2 years and been through this process, and really think that this is a very innovative document. I think this is not only something that's wonderful for the Delta, but for the rest of the state that's grappling with some of these issues. And I just want to specifically mention a reference to subsidence, which I think is a big problem for California as a whole, but to actually take efforts to reverse that is a wonderful thing for the entire Delta and for all the waterways of California, as they see this as a document that they can mimic in their efforts to be part of the solution. Also, nature-based solutions is a growing body of science. It's amazing that we're returning to, just basic nature to help solve some of our problems. Maintenance is always cheaper than restoration. And if we had done a modicum of maintenance over the course of our history, state's development, we wouldn't need to be investing in these big, huge capital projects. So adding that in conjunction with working tribes, I think is also a very innovative concept, something that's very new. And I think that's going to serve the Delta very well for many years to come. And also, it's going to be a model for other parts of the state and other jurisdictions to follow. So in that, I want to thank staff. I want to thank everybody that was involved in this process. I want to move this and join in celebrating what is really a very momentous occasion for the entire Delta community.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, Member Branian. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, again, thank you. I know, and we've all been involved in parts of this at different times, and I appreciate it, and I know how much work it is. I'm ready to vote, but I have a question. Is there an example of implemented best multi-benefit project that we have done in the past, let's say 5 years maybe, or there has not been any of, or something close to multi-benefit project that you can remember and we can highlight at all?
There is the Lookout Slough Restoration Project that the council is very familiar with, that emphasizes both habitat restoration and flood protection. That's kind of, I think,
a good one.
A good example.
You just reminded me of it. Yeah.
It occurs at different scales. That's probably a very large scale type of situation, but there are also smaller similar types of projects that also provide those multiple benefits.
Sure. And then in the thinking of the concept, we also have looked at possibility of projects that we have in mind, or a list of multi-benefit projects, or we're still in the process of thinking the concept. And
the Delta Adapts framework really capitalizes on existing planned projects that are led by other agencies for the most part.
Good, thank you. I'm ready to vote.
Okay, I see Daniel has his hand up, so Member Zingali.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's no public comments here, but I would also second Mr. Huesa's motion to adopt the Delta Adapts adaptation plan.
Okay, yes, Diane Burgess.
Thank you. It's really interesting because we're dealing with a system that was modified in different ways by people that didn't know the impacts that certain things would have. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because I look at this document as something that we're adapting to things that were done in the past that we didn't know were going to have consequences. We're adapting to the current situation, and we're kind of anticipating challenges in the future, which is really an interesting document. Did you want to say something, Jeff? Okay. I love watching Jeff. I appreciate the low probability, high consequence. That is so easy to help people understand. So I appreciate that. There's so many changes that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a modified system, excuse me. We're dealing with also a culture of folks that are coming into this area that have a different understanding of the land, or lack of understanding, and doing their own thing. So it's just really interesting to say, okay, here you go. The question I have is, we've been working on FEMA issues in Contra Costa County. And there is an assumption that there is a system to back things up. Have we modified or incorporated that understanding that some of the things that were a given are not necessarily a given? Do you want to comment on that at all?
Sounds like you're referring to uncertainty.
Well, I think, yeah, the uncertainty of, well, I think, when we talk about flooding or earthquakes or, levee failures or, all these other things, there's certain backups possibly. And those backups may not be there, or there may be a higher threshold of responsibility on the part of certain people before things kick in. And so when we talk about adapting, I'm just curious if that's even where we're going in this. Not yet.
Well, I think the plan acknowledges the fact that some of these backstop systems will not necessarily at least not necessarily function in the way that we had assumed.
Right.
And I think one of the key strengths of this plan is that no agency is approaching something alone.
Right.
In the sense that every one of these strategies has a lead and numerous partners.
Yeah.
So, and then the role really that I think we see for the council is to hold all of that together.
Thank you.
To ensure that, if one thing we think may happen, doesn't happen, there are alternatives.
Right. And finally, I would just say, I think it's really important that as we go along in all of these things, wherever we can emphasize personal responsibility, whether it's land ownership or a community or a region, that we're always thinking about what we can do, whether it's investing in prevention, maintenance, improvements, that we're doing that. But I appreciate this document. I appreciate all the folks that have leaned in on this, and thank you for this document.
Thank you. Emma, I'm going to ask one more time about public comment, just because we've had more discussion from members before we take our vote.
I see no additional requests for public comment, Madam Chair.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So we have a motion for adoption of Resolution 2025-08, which adopts the final Delta Adapts Adaptation Plan for Member Hueso, seconded by Member Zingali. And we can go ahead with a roll call vote on that, Emma.
Councilmember Burgess.
Aye.
Burgess, aye. Councilmember Damrell. Damrell, aye. Councilmember Hueso. Hueso, aye. Councilmember Maranian.
Aye.
Maranian, aye. Councilmember Zingali.
Yes.
Zingali, aye. Chair Lee.
Yes.
Lee, aye. The motion passes.
Yay. I think that deserves a round of applause. Good job. Excellent. Right. Thanks, staff, for that presentation. Exactly. You over the finish line. I love that. Our next agenda item is the chair's report. We are running a few minutes late, so I'll just keep this very, very brief. First of all, happy Pride Month. Very excited about that. Last year at this time, I was in Nashville, and unbeknownst to us, the first morning that we were there, they were holding their Pride Parade, and we were so, was the cherry on top of a wonderful trip. So now this year, I was just thinking about that again, and how much I like this time of year, and being able to acknowledge all of our staff and friends and family, and the support and love that we send out to them during this time of the year, especially. Yesterday, I attended the National Heritage Area Advisory meeting. We had a great conversation about federal funding. It's interesting that they didn't really get doged, but it is being held up in the Office of Management and Budget for all of the 60 National Heritage areas. So we're kind of working through what we're going to do there. The advisory committee had some suggestions about pursuing other types of funding and contingency planning, I guess, for depending on what happens with the Fed. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Diane. Diane was present there too.
I think every agency across all kinds of spheres of things that government does is trying to be nimble and think about all the different scenarios. And I think that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, exactly. We also had conversations about how the National Heritage Area could participate in next year's 175th anniversary of California and the 250th anniversary of the US. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how they can use some of those events to leverage and help communicate about what the National Heritage Area is doing down in the Delta and getting people to come in and start to get their passports stamped. And it's just a fun and exciting event. So that is kind of it for me. Are there any member updates that anybody else wants to chime in with? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask for public comment on this item.
There is no public comment in Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali?
None here.
All right.
No public comment.
Thank you. Agenda item 8 is our executive officer's report. So I'll turn it over to Jessica Pearson.
Thank you. Yep, it's officially summer, and I'm glad you mentioned celebration of Pride Month. Various state agencies showed up to march in the annual Pride Parade here in Sacramento on June 15th. And I wanted to thank all of council staff who attended or participated on behalf of our agency. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are a crucial aspect of how we accomplish our mission. And our participation in this annual event is really a great way to demonstrate our commitment to those values. Yesterday, I had the opportunity, along with several planning and science staff, to get out in the field and visit Webb Tract in the Delta in Shasta County. This is an island owned by Metropolitan Water District, and they generously led us on a tour from council staff, and they spoke about how they plan to execute a multi-benefit restoration project. Per Councilmember Maranian's question, this is one of those types of projects. It will be funded by a $20 million nature-based solutions grant from the Delta Conservancy, and the goals include reducing overall emissions from the island, subsidence reversal, and providing habitat for a variety of species of concern. The island is accessible by boat or ferry only. It has a really killer view of Mount Diablo, and it's 5,500 acres. It's huge, and sometimes you just have to get out there to really appreciate that. The project itself is going to cover a large portion of the overall acreage of the island, so it's one big project. It's not without its challenges, and we heard a lot about what some of those challenges could be. It's a very ambitious project, but we're happy to provide updates as it progresses. And I know that Councilmember Burgess was out there last week as well.
Yeah, it was a project that I helped get to approve while serving on the Delta Conservancy as well. And the thing is I was talking earlier about folks have done things out in this system without knowing. Well, they're still figuring out how to do this properly and make sense financially. So there's the farming, which is a challenge when you're talking about being on an island, and then there's the restoration work, and that is adaptive management. We've talked about adaptive management, but there's that's not only the physical of how to do it, but it's also the financial of how to do it, and it's looking at the island itself and seeing how things will do things naturally. And so it's a great project, and I got to tour it as well, and it is big. I will still say I am skeptical about the rice farming as a revenue, and I'm also skeptical about the sequestration credits, because I think it could be volatile possibly if there were different political agendas out there, but I think that what they're doing out there is really great.
I think that's an important aspect of this project to consider is It's nice to have someone experiment so that others who have land in the Delta can learn from those successes or challenges or mistakes. So very interesting project. I think we'll all learn a lot no matter what happens. We do have two covered actions that have been filed since our last meeting. On May 28th, Contra Costa County submitted a certificate of consistency for the newly adopted Contra Costa County 2045 General Plan and supporting climate action and adaptation plan. The general plan is a long-range planning document that includes goals, policies, and actions that will guide county decision-making related to land use and infrastructure over the next 20 years. It includes broad community goals and updates the county's land use policy framework consistent with requirements of state law, with an emphasis on environmental justice and economic development, community health, and sustainability. So public review opened on May 29th for that project and continues through June 30th. Also on June 20th, we had a filing by Solano County for their cash slough mitigation bank. This project consists of the development of a private commercial mitigation bank at the southernmost reach of the Yolo bypass in Solano County. The project would include a low water crossing under State Route 84, which would restore tidal connection to the project site, and also aims to restore 300 acres of tidal freshwater wetland and floodplain associated vegetation communities. These efforts will expand the floodplain of the Sacramento River and create shaded riverine aquatic habitat. Public review opened on June 19th and continues through July 21st. So for more details on either of those projects, you can check our website under Delta Plan and then covered actions. Lot on Contra Costa County today. We sent a letter to the county on June 23rd regarding adjustments to the Contra Costa County urban limit line proposed by the Board of Supervisors. The urban limit line is important to the council because our regulatory policies refer to future development within the line as permitted under the Delta Plan. The board is proposing a net decrease of developable areas within the urban limit line in the Delta, which appears to be a positive outcome that supports Delta Plan strategies to locate new development wisely, to reduce flood risks and protect lands for restoration. In the letter, council staff simply invite county staff to engage in discussion as this process continues. So copies of all of those letters are always available in your packet.
So while we were looking at the urban limit line in our board meeting the other day, I asked the impact that this would have on other agencies, because I know that based on the letter that I saw, there would need to be some possible actions done at the stewardship level. Do we anticipate other counties or agencies doing some similar I don't know if it's urban limit line or if it's something else.
Well, we did something similar in the Delta Plan for all county in terms of where development was permittable under the Delta Plan or permissible under the Delta Plan. So if any of those planning documents that are baked into the Delta Plan at the local level, if they propose any changes, the council could consider whether we want to update the plan or not, depending on the goals of those changes.
And do we keep some sort of, do we understand the timelines of some of these different things? Because I know, like with ours, we know that we'll have to put it on the ballot again.
Yeah, our planning staff track our list of Delta actions, and so we're always keeping an eye on all those regional planning processes.
I just wanted to highlight that there's a lot of things going on that staff does, and so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. On personnel, I would like to welcome a new volunteer with our collaborative science and peer review unit, Ioana Saraton. Ioana is an environmental policy and management master's student from UC Davis and will be contributing to the development of the new Delta Science Plan. She's passionate about managing resources for the benefit of wildlife and people. And her free time, she enjoys birding, reading science fiction, and hanging out with her conure, which I had to Google, is a small parrot named Gus. And I don't often mention departures, but we have a retirement happening this month of a longtime employee. So I'd like to take a moment to recognize Lauren Hastings, our program manager who has most recently been supporting the Delta Independent Science Board. Lauren's not in the room, but I guarantee she's listening at home. So Lauren is going to be retiring from the Delta Science program next week after over 25 years of state service. And all of that has essentially been with either our science program or the predecessor CalFed science program. So a lot of institutional knowledge there. And Lauren has had a lot of accomplishments in her illustrative career. Some notable achievements include helping to craft the mission of the Delta Science program in the Delta Reform Act, and developing the science sections of the Delta plan. In fact, Lauren and I worked very closely together in 2010, 2011, side by side with our laptops, where she was explaining to me some of these dense scientific concepts, and I was helping to translate them into language that would be understandable in the Delta plan. So she was very patient and a good teacher in that way. Most recently, she's been providing critical support to the Delta Independent Science Board, and that's been a great role for her because she's a staunch advocate of independent science and a big champion of the Delta Science program. So we're grateful for Lauren's service and accomplishments. We were celebrating her earlier this week in the office, and I just want to wish her well in her retirement. Couple more things I want to highlight in your packet, and then I'll wrap up and move to our legislative report. We do continue to grow our email listserv and followers on our LinkedIn page. So actually quite a bit of increase and growing interest in the happenings of our work in the Delta. We also have a brand new webpage dedicated to our Science for Communities initiative for those who want to learn more and figure out how they can participate in that. We also just released our latest episode of the Delta Dispatch podcast, and the topic for this one is Delta as Place, and I highly recommend that you give it a listen. And with that, I'm going to invite up our Executive Fellow, Audrey Cho, and our USF McCarthy Fellow, Jaden Jekyll, and they're going to present our legislative update.
Good morning, Chair and council members. Great to be with you here today. We have quite a few updates for you on the legislative and policy side of things, and so I'll just jump right in if we can get the slides loaded. Next slide, please. Great. So first, I'd like to update you on the status of Senate Bill 650. On June 17th, the bill advanced out of the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee 10-0 and will be heard in the Assembly Judiciary Committee on July 1st. And I look forward to keeping you all updated on its progress through the legislative process. Next slide, please. We also recently hosted a Get to Know the Delta Science program briefing for legislative staff on June 13th, led by lead scientist Dr. Lisa Marie Myers and Deputy Executive Officer for Science Henry DeBay. This briefing covered Delta and Delta Science program basics and introduced attendees to some of the key challenges and opportunities for the region. We had really great engagement and questions from staff of Delta Caucus, member offices, and the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee. And the picture on your screen shows Henry and Lisa Marie leading our attendees through a really awesome activity. Next slide, please. In Senate leadership news, you may have heard that Senator Monique Limon was selected to take over for Senator Mike McGuire as the new Senate President Pro Tem in early 2026. Senator Limon currently chairs the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee and represents the counties of Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Ventura. She is the first woman of color to take the position. Next slide, please. And at the federal level, there was a new House resolution introduced on June 4th by Representative Josh Harder concerning the golden mussel. Josh Harder is the representative for San Joaquin, Stanislaus, and Contra Costa counties. This bill would amend the Non-Indigenous Aquatic Nuisance Prevention and Control Act of 1990 to create a demonstration program for the golden mussel, specifically in the Delta. This would include prevention, monitoring, eradication, and an educational campaign, as well as research efforts to the tune of about $15 million per year through 2030. Since its introduction, it was referred to the Committees on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Committee on Natural Resources. The act is endorsed by the Delta Counties Coalition. And now I will pass it over to Jaden Jekyll, our McCarthy Fellow.
Next slide, please. On June 6th, the state's Lands Commission announced they had completed the largest single-site commercial abandoned vessel abatement and removal action in its history. These abandoned vessels were located in the 7 Mile Slough area of the Delta, also known as the Scari site. These were abandoned by a closed marine construction business for years, creating a navigational hazard. As shown in the images presented on screen, the site consisted of several large crane barges, 2 tugboats, and other smaller work and recreational vehicles. Over 1,000 gallons of previously unknown diesel fuel were removed from the site. In total, this consisted of almost 1,000 tons of debris removed from our Delta. We're very excited about this removal, as Chapter 5 of our governing Delta plan specifically outlines the recommendations related to the removal of abandoned and derelict vessels. As noted in Recommendation 11, provide new and existing recreation activities. Next slide, please. Lastly, as you may remember from the March 2025 Council update, Delta Caucus and State Assembly member Rhodesia Ransom introduced AB 274, which would create an inventory of all abandoned and derelict commercial and recreational vessels in the Delta. This bill recently failed a fiscal deadline and became a 2-year bill. As you may know, sustained funding for these type of activities continues to be a challenge. Thank you, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? Yes, Diane.
The inventory, it seems like there had been an inventory, but it wasn't totally complete. Can you remind me?
Yeah, so in April of 2024, the council did write a support letter for a House resolution by Congressman John Garamendi, which would have created it would have authorized the Army Corps of Engineers to remove any abandoned vessels that weren't necessarily impeding navigation within the Delta. Unfortunately, that bill didn't move past like the House committee process, and so there are also efforts at the state level through the State Lands Commission to create an inventory. But yeah,
it's really expensive to do this.
Extremely expensive, yeah.
And to find out that there's so much fuel down there on this last project. If we don't get that out, then it really does create a lot of impacts. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn it back over to Jessica. Oh, Daniel, sorry, you have your hand up, Daniel. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to express appreciation to Audrey and Jaden for holding it down so well with Brandon's departure. Really appreciate you guys.
Absolutely, kudos. Good job.
Thank you. Okay, well, just a little conclusion here. So earlier on the agenda, you heard from the Delta Adapts team and their work, which was really about centering community research and data needs. And then later today, you'll hear from staff who are leading data synthesis work. So this work that you'll hear about on the agenda today combines training for early career scientists with additional opportunities for participants to use those skills to address questions that are important to Bay Delta management. So there's some themes going on that may not be immediately obvious, but they do thread through the agenda. So these presentations really are just exemplifying the synergies across our work, specifically this goal that we have to further community engagement and applied research that addresses Delta challenges. But first, we will hear from our Delta lead scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers, and then that concludes my executive officer's report.
Thank you. Any other member comments or questions for Jessica? No, if not, I'll take public comment on this item.
There are no public comments in Sacramento.
Okay.
None here.
Thank you, Daniel. As Jessica mentioned, we're going to move on to agenda item number 9, our lead scientist report with Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers.
Thank you, Chair Lee. And today I have a slide deck to run through the topics of the that are being highlighted today. Thank you, Nick Rowlands, who is our newest employee in the Collaborative Science and Communications Department. I'm looking for the slideshow, but I'll just begin by saying that today I'm going to focus on, and you can go to the next slide, thanks. I'm going to focus on data stewardship. And you often talk about anticipatory science for adaptation, like you heard about in Delta Adapt, but that has to include valuing past data sets that we've inherited. And we're very lucky here in the Delta. We have data sets going back to the 50s in our State Water Board run CDN data set. CDN is the California Environmental Data Exchange Network. And we also have other things over the decades with consistent measurements in time and space and in method. This includes the USGS data sets from the boats that go up monthly from the Bay to the Delta and collect in the same place in the same way, going back to 1969. But you have to consider that things have changed since 1969. So there are some times when we need to change methods. And the reason you might change a method could be for efficiency, to save money. It could be also to improve detection limits. Maybe you can get a lower detection. You can see, a lower concentration of a particular element of concern, or you can have more precision. And another thing is real-time access. So you might move to a method that is automated, continuous measurements out in the field and the water, and then you can just release it on the website immediately. So there's reasons to do method changing, but the question you have to grapple with is whether to do it and what you're going to lose by doing that change. I'm going to give you an example of one who didn't change. So in Lake Tahoe, they have the cleanest water, or the most water clarity of all lakes in the country, and they measure it with a Secchi disc, which is super old school. It's just dropping a white disc down and then seeing how deep it is. People understand that. So they keep doing this every year because they can put out reports that people understand. And the only way to make the water less murky is for people to understand in the watershed what their impacts are and how the water is changing. So there are reasons not to change. However, there are reasons to change again, and economics is part of it. So the next slide lays out really what these authors are trying to say is, if you're going to do method switching, just to be sure that your method switching is not going, the method change is not going to be interpreted as an environmental change in the data set, because the system is changing at the same time the method is changing. That will confound your results. These are ways to address that. These are best practices. So for example, being very clear on the kind of method switch that you're doing, manual to manual, basically meaning the way they give some examples in the paper, but for example, otolith counting. This is how we date how old a fish is. Right now we do it visually, like counting tree rings. There's ways to also do that using chemical signatures. And it's also manual, but it's more accurate. You have less variability between the people that are counting those rings. You have to be clear on the goals. If the goal is to save money, then you want to be clear on that and then illustrate that you've actually saved money or time. Then they suggest creating a plan to do that. So exactly how you're going to evaluate these changes through time. And then the next point is to actually compare one-to-one how variable the data is with the new method versus the old method. Do you get the exact same results? Are they biased a little bit higher or lower? Can that be corrected for? Is the variability changing? And that's the lower right corner in this circle of actions, which is a figure in their paper. And their other argument here with this intercalibration of the two of your data is to bring other people in at this point. Don't just do it yourself. There's a community using your data. It's not just you. And for them to be able to use your data in the future, they need to see how it affects their interpretations and how things have changed. as well as they may have saltier water and you have fresher water, and maybe the method you're switching to doesn't work as well in their kind of water. You have to, and the system might be changing towards more salty water, and you need to know that this method is going to work in the long run. So it's really important to bring the community in rather than just go it alone. And so the last point that they make is that you need to run these methods simultaneously and consistently for a while until there's agreement that you're not going to be confounding environmental change with method change. And that's the graphic with the blue and the yellow line, just basically saying that you have overlap to show that you have confidence in the new method. And so we can say, oh, we have all this data that we're sharing through the CDIN data sets, and we all have FAIR, which is basically findable, accessible, interpretable, and trying to remember the R of FAIR right now. I'm so sorry, but basically findable and reusable data. You might have that data, but the hard work of synthesis is it's not just that the data had it's not just that when you put your data into CDIN, for example, you have to say what method you used. And so when you go to do synthesis, like you're going to hear about in the next report, just having it say what the method you use is great, but that's really not enough. There's other metadata that goes in there that needs to be reported to make the work synthesizable and useful. And so pulling together these disparate data sets need this kind of intercomparability through time to make the big picture and the long story even possible. And so if you really, one of Councilmember Damerel's comments is often, is the Delta getting better or is it getting worse? You can't do that unless you have real consistency in your ability to link these data sets together. So really that's my main point, is that urgency and splashy new tools are often outweighing the value of these long-term data sets, which we're so lucky to have. And they're unique in terms of our ability to watch how the ecosystem is functioning, whether we're having responses to operations or extreme events, or even long-term changes like the way the ocean is changing. You can see it if you have a long-term data set. It's kind of like medical records for yourself or your family health history. If you don't have this, it's going to give you difficulty in evaluating risk and responses in the future. And then also long-term data sets are available, they're transparent, and they build trust in the community. So I think these are wise investments for us to consider as we move towards decision-making under deep uncertainty. And so really, I want to highlight the value of long-term data sets, which I think are starting to they need to be celebrated. And I think that's what you'll hear in the next presentation about synthesis.
And these are very relevant topics right now in the Delta, because it's very expensive to run boats to do trawl surveys for different types of fish species. So there are alternatives that are being considered, and in some cases have replaced those traditional trawl surveys because they're very time and labor intensive. But there's still debate about whether the new, innovative way that they're then assessing fish populations is as effective as the old, and whether the data sets line up, and can you then trust the new data set to draw on trends over the long term. So these debates are ongoing in the science community in the Delta in significant ways.
Yeah, thank you for that, JP. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I know Member Miller isn't here today, but she often asks about open data and everything. And I'm sure all of this is all open and accessible and available through different portals.
Yeah, we have rules. We have AB 1755 where you have to make if you've been funded by a state agency or federal agencies feel the same way, you have to make it available. I'm thinking that an additional layer to the way we report on CDIN could be more metadata that makes it easier for the synthetic work to happen, rather than just, method EPA 1631, some sort of, simple statement, because how was the sample collected, preserved, brought into the lab? What's the QA that was used in the lab itself? there's a lot of little details that make it difficult to synthesize disparate data sets, but you can't, if you're not doing that, you're not really being able to make decisions. So yes, it's available, but I feel like a little bit more metadata would be helpful. And I think that comes out sometimes from these synthesis projects at the National Center of Ecological Analysis and Synthesis.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions on that topic? Nope. Okay, go ahead.
Great. Okay. So let's move forward to the next slide, some things to highlight. The Research Awards seminar series is now over. We had our last presentation on May 7th, and sorry, that must be June 7th. And the presentations of that day were on the last 3 of the 16 projects that were funded in 2020 and 2021. Which were, again, we gave $10 million in concert with the state water contractors and with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Those 3 focused on salmon, and in particular, reorienting to recovery with Renee Henry, predation tracking with Dr. Rebecca Buchanan, and then travel patterns and times by Russell Perry. Dr. Russell Perry. And those, again, are one of our flagship products. They're available on YouTube. They have a nice, tight presentation of the management implications of their work, and then questions from the people online. It was well attended. And now that this is complete, you can see all of those 16 projects shared in that way on the YouTube website. The other thing to highlight is the Delta Collaboratory Kickoff meeting that occurred 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to highlight that in the next slide. But let's just put a couple things on your radar. We do have the final report released now for the Hydrological Engineering Center HEC-RES-SIM, Reservoir Simulation Water Temperature Peer Review. It's finally released. The report came out. You can see it online, and you're going to hear about that in July more. Right now, we're also having a review of the science plan of the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes program of the Department of Water Resources. And that won't be released until at some point in July, and then you'll hear that, an update on that as well. Something else on the that happened uniquely is that the Delta Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy have pulled together this Delta Carbon team. Which has, there were about 30 people from agencies and academic settings on the call that happened on May 27th. And then there was another one yesterday. And they're basically pulling together working groups to track carbon implications in the Delta. WebTracked is a particularly good example of this, a place where re-wetting of the soil is starting to happen, and there are carbon implications of that. Just to be clear again, when we disconnect land from water, there are big changes that happen to the carbon cycle, and those they have climate implications in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. There's levee stability issues, of course, and then agricultural land viability itself, the subsidence and the quality of the soil. And so there's going to be sub-teams focused on that, those topics, as well as mapping that are coming up and need to be consolidated and shared towards goals that are related to carbon tracking, basically. And then the last thing to highlight on your radar is that right now, just so you know, it's a new moon. You might have noticed the sky is very clear. And so we're in a king tide situation. So we have the highest high, our highs come in the middle of the night. And so that means our lowest lows are during the day. Right now, the tide is really low, and we have topographic data being collected with funding from 4 agencies. We are one of them, to map the whole Bay Delta in a completely seamless hydrodynamic fashion at low tide to get into the shoals at sub 10 centimeters accuracy, just incredibly good quality data. And I know they're flying today because it's the lowest low of the whole summer. So it's a particular, and just so you know, like if it's -2 feet below sea level at the Golden Gate Bridge, 4 hours later, it's at Rio Vista. So right about now, it's about low tide in Rio Vista, about a foot below sea level. And then out in Stockton, that's another 2 hours later. And so that's about I think they're not quite a foot lower, but they're about half a foot lower than sea level at about 2 o'clock today. So this is a really great foundational project for us to start tracking elevations through time, and also how the water is flowing. So that's kind of a fun thing. And we were gonna track it with its tail number, because actually if you go to FlightAware, you can actually see the plane, and I don't know where it is right now, but next month we might be talking about that. All right. Last thing to talk about is this slide here, the Delta Collaboratory Kickoff. This is a big deal. We're finally starting to scope some projects that deal with collaborative modeling across these 3 actions that we know we need to understand better, which is predicting HABs, managing for salinity intrusion, and restoring tidal wetlands food webs. And so these 3 groups have started working this summer and working in tandem to test models that can address those management needs. And we had, our call was about 20 people on the call. We heard everybody's plans, the teams, and there are going to be monthly check-ins, and we expect to report out some of the high-level findings of these groups in terms of the directions and advances that are possible in short term, sort of like over a year, versus long term, maybe from 5 years. What could we expect for some actual advances by working together? And you'll probably hear about it at DPIC, if not in a council meeting in November or December when our white paper comes out. And they also probably will be using some similar data sets, including things like this new the digital elevation model, as well as hydrodynamic models that deal with water residence time and where the water's flowing and whether it's stratified and all that kind of details. And that's it. Yeah.
Those are huge things, each of those.
Yeah, we've been busy. It's a good month.
Those are huge things, each of those things. And then how do they affect each other?
Exactly.
Right?
You can't think about one individually. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's an ambitious project, but I think we have the enthusiasm and the capabilities in-house to move forward. Thank you. Okay, I think I can move to the by the numbers. Just to say that things don't really actually look that different than what you saw in May. A couple of big things to note is that water temperatures are just holding just constant, just as expected. And you can sort of see why, because the reservoir storage is high. Oroville was at 122% in May as well. So it's near capacity, and it's just, there's a lot of water still available there. And Shasta, of course, is still over its average storage at this point. San Luis is a bit below. And then rainfall is actually, again, higher than normal in the Northern Sierra, and about 2/3 of what's normal in the Central Sierra, which is about what you had last month. I will say that the flows are down, in particular for the San Joaquin River. It was more like 2,500 CFS last month, so we're having some lower flows there, but we don't see a bump up of salinity, which is good, and this is probably an effect of Friant Dam operations as well. And the exports, the combined diversions that we send south are actually way up, which actually is in keeping with what would be happening at this time this year. So it's about 3-fold higher than what it was last month. So we are starting to send more exports south. So, but otherwise, no real surprises in here. And the overall prediction is for a hot, dry summer with a lot of fuel, and so wildfire risk is high this year. So it's good that we have so much water in the reservoirs.
Great, thank you. Any questions from members for Lisa Marie? Nope, I don't see any from Daniel. So thank you very much. That was very informative. Excellent. I'll ask Emma if we have any public comment.
No public comment in Sacramento.
None here.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we have agenda item 10, which is a topic of Delta Synthesis Working Groups, a collaboration with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers for the introductions of the panel.
Yeah, we're particularly proud of this partnership. I'm so glad to be able to introduce the Deputy Executive Officer of Science, Henry DeBay, and Program Manager Maggie Chrisman to present on our partnership with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa Marie. Good morning, Chair, council members. We know this is the penultimate agenda item, so we want to keep it light and fun. So we're going to talk about synthesis, and we're going to talk about it in terms of puzzles. So yeah, just to introduce myself again, my name is Henry DeBay. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Science at the Delta Stewardship Council. I'm joined by Maggie Chrisman, who's the Program Manager for the Science Communication and Synthesis Unit. And we're going to talk about synthesis. So one of the core functions of the Delta Science Program as outlined in the Delta Reform Act. And it's a key way that we provide best possible science to inform water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. So specifically, we'll cover what synthesis is, why it matters, what happens when you don't do it, and about our growing partnership with NCES, or the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, based out of UC Santa Barbara. And thank you also, Lisa Marie and JP, for the wonderful setup on synthesis. So we're already getting into this. Next slide, please. So what is synthesis anyway? Basically, it's like putting together a puzzle, like the slide shows here. And that's because synthesis combines different puzzle pieces of data to shed light on a bigger picture for a given topic. And so every time you hear us say synthesis in this presentation, just think back to puzzles. So next slide, please. So for our purposes today, a puzzle piece is data. And most of the data that we have in the Delta comes from these monitoring surveys that were referred to earlier, like the one shown. And so just a quick aside here on the difference between monitoring surveys and research, because they're both important in terms of shedding light on how the Delta is working or not, how things are changing. But research is more like an experiment that scientists set up to answer specific science questions. So they may release fish in a certain part of the Delta and see where those fish go. Monitoring surveys, on the other hand, are recurring sampling at the same place at the same time over time to really monitor the Delta environment and see changes over time. Another difference is that monitoring is typically required by water operations permits, whereas research is less required or less often required. And so an example of a monitoring survey is the 20-millimeter survey that's shown here on the slide. This one's administered by CDFW, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And what this survey involves is CDFW staff towing a net through the water in the Delta with a mesh size of 20 millimeters. So that means the spaces in the net are 20 millimeters big, so that's roughly 3/4 of an inch. And they're towing this net to sample for baby fish in the Delta. And they do this at 47 locations throughout the Delta, all the way from near Stockton to the Carquinez Bridge. And they do this every other week from March to July, and they've been doing this since 1995. So if you think of that survey being that one puzzle piece and all the data that comes with that survey, it's a lot of data. And a lot of data that tells you about, what fish were caught, when, under what conditions. So next slide, please. And so the rub is that it turns out there's 156 puzzle pieces of monitoring data in the Delta on everything from fish to subsidence to water quality. And so like the 20-millimeter survey, a lot of these single puzzle pieces that are shown here on this slide represent vast amounts of data collected over decades. And so the power of synthesis, or building puzzles as it were, is to connect this data to see the bigger picture. Next slide. And so using synthesis to see this bigger picture is what a handful of scientists did back in the mid-2000s when they started to notice a decline in Delta smelt, which is an endemic species, so only exists in this part of the world and is endangered in the Delta. So These scientists combined 5 different puzzle pieces of survey data in the Delta. Of course, that's easier said than done, because as Lisa Marie pointed out, a lot of the times the data isn't apples to apples. It's in different formats. It's collected at different times a day, at different places. It's not stored in the same location. And so it takes knowledge of these surveys and expertise and statistics and data science to integrate this data in an accurate and meaningful way. And so shown here are the different surveys for which these scientists combine data. And each of these surveys targets native Delta fish at different life stages. So from top to bottom, the smelt larval survey targets native fish at the beginning of their life cycle when they're still larvae. The 20 millimeter targets slightly larger fish, and so on and so forth. And so what the scientists found is that it wasn't just Delta smelt that were declining. It was other native fish like longfin smelt, striped bass, threadfin shad, as the graphs here on the right show. And I'm realizing I don't have citations, so I'm going to get in trouble from the scientists, but that's from summer et al. 2007. So there you go, Ted. So these concurrent declines came to be known as the pelagic organism decline. And these declines were ultimately attributed to changes in food availability for these fish because of the introduction of invasive clams that were sucking up a lot of the potential fish food in the water. And this synthesis ultimately helped inform efforts to make more fish food through restoration, through changes to water operations. But importantly, this effort really demonstrated to the science community across the Delta the tremendous value of synthesis and how if you don't do it, you really can miss that bigger picture. Next slide. And so that is part of the reason that the legislature, so this is pulled from the Reform Act, called out synthesis as a core function for the Delta Science Program in the Delta Reform Act. So promoting and facilitating and doing synthesis is a big part of what we do, led by Maggie and her unit. And Maggie will talk more about the principles and approaches and ways that we do synthesis in some of our recent and upcoming efforts. So with that, I'll turn it over to Maggie.
Thank you, Henry, for that, and Lisa Marie for kind of this excellent lead into this next part. So next slide. So to start off with this story, I really want to recognize that open science principles lay the foundation for the synthesis work that we do at the Delta Science Program. And the term open science, just so we're all on the same page, refers to an international movement in science that seeks to make all aspects of a research process, from data to methods to publications and other outputs, open and transparent and available for anyone to use them and see them and have access to them. Because the 3 principles that are shown here on this slide form the foundation of a lot of our work, I'm going to set us up with some definitions to start. So the first one here on the left is accessibility. You can think of this in the context of open data. We've said that term a few times today already, and want to highlight that California's AB 1755 is part of this too. It speaks to ensuring that data and information, so those puzzle pieces that Henry's been talking about and that Lisa Marie was talking about before that, are findable and available for use. We also emphasize reproducibility. You can think of this as open methods. So what we're doing with data, the methods, the code that we produce are shared transparently so that the work can be replicated by anyone. This builds trust and also fosters shared use of techniques and workloads amongst the research community. Finally, we emphasize inclusivity, or the idea of open collaboration. So we want to include participants in our research processes that reflect diverse backgrounds, perspectives, disciplines, and ways of knowing. Over the last decade, there's been major advancements, last couple decades really, in the open science movement, which have made synthesis a much more powerful tool, especially with this ever-increasing amount of data and information we have available to us. In that vein, though, open science is not easy. It requires scientists to constantly be learning new software, new techniques, new workflows to stay at the forefront of these activities. And recognizing this a few years ago and our need to grow our community's capacity to harness what we already have in all of our data sets available to us, we turned to a partnership with a program that in many ways is at the forefront of all of these things we're talking about. So next slide. So this is a segue into introducing the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. We usually sound out their acronym as NCES. So this is a globally recognized institution for synthesis science. They're a big deal. It's been an amazing partnership. They were established in 1995 and are affiliated with UC Santa Barbara. They're in their 30th year, and they're doing a lot of work right now highlighting all of the impact that this work that they've done has made to our world, really. And so I definitely encourage you to go check out some of the materials that they're posting on their website right now. But they have three main areas of focus to their work. One is that they're developing advancements in data science and research methods for synthesis. Second, they're also conducting research themselves using data analytics and synthesis techniques. And then finally, they're training scientists to do this work as well. And they're a big partner with a number of agencies and other academic institutions. Examples of some of their projects are here on the slide, and I'm going to briefly highlight, I'm not talking a lot of detail, but this one on the left, the Arctic Data Center. So that's effectively a data and software repository that's funded by the National Science Foundation to support programs related to their polar research. This data center links all of the data through these funded projects and hosts them in accessible and reproducible ways. And one of the things NCES provides, in addition to maintaining this data center, is training and technical support to those researchers, and they also facilitate what they call synthesis working groups. These are groups of people that come together to analyze the data and address big picture issues for their region. And it's NCES's leadership and experience in these programs that drew our attention and led us to the idea of coming together to partner with them to organize our own synthesis working groups. So next slide. And that's where I'll introduce this idea of Delta synthesis working groups. So about 5 years ago, we launched this partnership to focus on building capacity in our own system while also addressing questions we face here. So first and foremost, these groups come together and are provided high quality training led by NCES experts in data science and statistical techniques. And it includes researchers from all across the Bay Delta. We then support those participants in projects where they can directly apply those new skills to produce meaningful outputs and advance our state of knowledge. And then finally, these are spaces we're creating to enhance collaboration. We're making partnerships and building bridges across different state and federal agencies, other organizations, and academia. So next slide. I'm going to quickly walk through this. This is just kind of a visual we put together to kind of show a little bit or provide more context for how these working groups operate. So they launch with 3 weeks of focused training. The science program staff set a theme typically for the trainings and then invite participants. And then NCES crafts a curriculum to help people understand how they can address those questions through synthesis techniques. And it's a very tailored program. It's very exciting. During these workshop weeks with the trainings, the groups come together, given the theme that we've provided, and kind of refine and develop some research questions, and then start looking at available data, pulling things, gathering stuff together to see what kinds of questions we can ask and what's available to answer these questions. So next slide. But it's important to recognize the work is not all done in 3 weeks, as you might expect. We set an expectation with participants that the work will continue for a year or two beyond. It kind of depends on the research questions that they come up with. But during the following year or two, these working groups continue to come together to meet and produce products along the way. And I do want to highlight that although we do have a limited number of capacity of people that can participate in the trainings, we do post and make the training curriculum that NCES puts together completely accessible. It's all on our website. You can go back and access it and run through training modules yourself to learn about all of these different methods. But the data sets that are being gathered, or the data that's being gathered, are being integrated into combined data sets and published. They're being shared openly so that others can use them. And we're also sharing publications along the way. We're already seeing impacts of this work. So as I've said, one of the big goals of this work is enhancing capacity in our system to do synthesis science. And these people that are participating in the trainings are going back to their regular jobs, so to speak, and applying those skills right away. And we're seeing impacts of that. I can provide examples if you're interested. And then also we're making progress on some key knowledge gaps, which I'll highlight in the next couple slides. And we're really seeing some of these collaborative networks being built and strengthened. So next slide. So just really quickly, I'm going to highlight what the focus of some of the past working groups have been so far. So the very first one we launched was in 2021, and we gave it the theme of drivers of the estuarine food supply. So they're really meant to come together and explore some of the knowledge gaps we have in our food web, and that's been echoed a few times this morning as well. This might sound familiar to you. One of the participants from this group actually highlighted the paper that's shown here in this conceptual model that's shown here at a council meeting last April as part of the lead scientist report. But effectively what this group did is they came together and they took 7 of those puzzle pieces that Henry was showing earlier from different monitoring surveys, and they looked at them across 40 years and combined them into a single data set that allowed us for the first time to look at food webs and answer certain questions that we'd never been able to do based on data in the past. A key takeaway is highlighted here. I'm not going to go into detail about it because, again, you can see the original presentation of this paper last year if you want to get more detail. But essentially, they were able to see, again, based on data, that there's similar effects on some of our important fish in the estuary that are being driven by environmental factors like flows and water temperature and turbidity, as well as by food availability, so other parts of the food web. So next slide. In 2023, we launched our second of these working groups, and that was given a very different theme. We looked at managing the Delta as a social ecological system. This also builds on some of the themes we heard about earlier in the presentation. For this, one of the sub-teams is exploring, the work is still underway, I should note, so I'm not going to be presenting on any key takeaways on this. It's more about like the progress they've made. But one of the sub-teams is looking at how restoration projects include social benefits and impacts and how that's related to social vulnerability indices in the Delta. And so this work is in progress. The teams are currently scraping through project proposals and project descriptions to understand what social benefits exist in these projects or are being called for, and then how are these projects actually spatially arranged and how are they filling social equity needs and gaps in our system. So stay tuned for more information coming out of this. I'm sure we'll be sharing it in updates at least through the lead scientist report. So next slide. At this point, I think I should mention I've been referencing participants in the groups, and I think we should make a note on who they've been because they're what really make this work happen. And as you can see here, we have a whole bunch of partners that have come together to effectively donate their staff and donate their staff time to work on these projects. So each cohort typically involves about 18 people. The 2021 and 2023 cohorts are the ones that are shown on the right. In the past, we've been emphasizing including people that are relatively early in their career and that represent a diverse number of agencies as well as academia. We're also really intentionally recruiting people for these projects that have a diverse set of backgrounds and areas of expertise so that we can pull together and answer questions across environmental, physical, and social science disciplines. So next slide. The focus a lot of times when we talk about these projects is on the products of the working groups, and those are like the published data sets, the reports, other dashboards that might be created from these teams. But I think it's really important to also recognize that there's a less tangible component that's critically important. And again, it goes back to one of our primary goals for this, and that's building capacity for scientists in our system to do this type of work. And so participants, one of the things that NCEAS does in their approach that's really, I think, fairly unique, but also really valuable, is they do surveys pre and post workshop events so that we can see how perceptions of synthesis and collaboration are changing amongst these participants through time as a result of this opportunity. And the word cloud shown here includes responses from participants from one of the groups to the prompt of please share the most valuable thing you learned from this training. So our skill set, R is a software, a statistical software that you use to, manipulate data sets and apply statistics and hopefully come out with some results. So a few quotes from surveys are also shown here to reflect how impactful participating in these working groups has been for them. And my personal favorite one is the one at the top. I wish everyone who worked with scientific data could take this course. And I took one of the NC's courses about 6 years ago, and that's how I felt, which is partly why we're doing these things here today. Next slide. So what's next? I just want to conclude with an update that another synthesis working group is in process right now. We're currently planning to kick it off later this year. We've taken a slightly different approach to planning this effort and released 2 open calls. You might have seen them go out on our listserv a few months ago. One is for people to let us know if they would like to participate in one of these in order to grow and build their data science skill set. And the other one is we are seeking input on priority topics that could be addressed by leveraging existing or publicly available data to inform management needs. And so the surveys are live. You can find them on our website. You can also email us or contact us at synthesis@deltacouncil.ca.gov. We still invite submissions, but I should note we've begun reviewing what we've already gotten so that we can start kind of seeing what's feasible to address in this next round. So with that, next slide, I'd like to just close out by saying thank you to everyone for your time and attention, and also for all the participation in this group. It takes a lot of different people to make these happen, and we appreciate all of it.
Excellent. Thank you. Very informative. Well, Lisa Marie, is there any conclusion from this that you want to wrap up with, or?
No, just to encourage people to apply, because I agree, it just changes your whole perspective on what's possible. And R, just to be clear, is like fabulous because it's open science. It's completely, anybody can have this and share your code with anybody in the world. So it's a particularly good skill set to have, even for especially for early career folks, because people use it.
Excellent. Yes, Member Burgess.
So I'm a science geek. I just get all excited when I hear about this. I was talking to JP the other day and I was like, really? We're going to get to talk about this? And she's like, yeah. I wasn't playing you. You know, in the work that I did with Friends of Marsh Creek, before I got into politics and all that, I loved the quote, in the end, we will only conserve what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will only understand what we are taught or learn. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about, you know, synthesis, hypothesis, you know, what is motivating us to ask the questions? And as technology advances, we have opportunities to check the science that we've been doing and compare it and see how efficient it is. But it's often, what is the motivation? Are you curious? Are you trying to prove a point? Are you trying to solve a problem? You know, there's always those things. And so when the synthesis goes, that's also how you're impacted. And I think that for a long time, folks have been manipulated by science in certain ways if they, you know, and there are certain groups when we talk about the socioeconomic, environmental justice things, folks didn't have access to be able to get into the data to show other points of view. So I love this. I think this is great. I also, you know, want to kind of draw awareness that there's an effort to curb access to science, to eliminate data access. And so I really appreciate us leaning in on, you know, enabling and storing and asking questions and being curious and not allowing it to be manipulated. So that's me geeking out. Thank you.
Great.
Just want to say thanks for those comments, and we appreciate your support.
Yeah. Somewhere in the back of my mind is a quote about the relationship between synthesis and intellect, but I can't remember it. So there you go. But it's there. Any other?
I have
Yes,
one
ma'am,
comment.
go ahead.
I served on the Water Quality Control Board in Los Angeles region for a long time, and I was always struggling with the idea of the data and the science, because the polluters come and present perfect data of why it's okay, and then the regulatory agencies come in. So I think the importance of this is probably bringing together some kind of a verified data sets that people can build their arguments about it on it. And it's exciting, because I struggled with that, because when you're sitting there as a regulator and watching people telling you things that makes total sense, and then the next group comes opposing with perfect data again. It's really I struggled with that for a long time, and I think this is a very, very good effort. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, Emma, do we have any public comments on this item?
No public comment in Sacramento.
No public comment in Eureka.
All right, thank you. Thank you both. Our final agenda item is our preparation for the next council meeting, which will take place on July 24th here at the CNRA building. So please refer to the posted meeting notice for further information or updates. And with that, we'll conclude our meeting. Thank you all very much for being here.